Hey guys, it's Mountain Walk, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about some more pre-modern MTG decks. This time we got a fairly large tournament, a German pre-modern championship held this month, or excuse me, last month on the 14th, and it has 72 players, and that's pretty cool, pretty neat. So we'll be looking at the top 8 of this tournament. All right, we got some cool stuff. Um, I think the best thing about this deck is just how clean it looks, and of course, aesthetics, that's really important to me. A deck has to look good. The numbers got to be just right. I mean, look at this. I mean, 4, 4, 4, 4, 2. I mean, oh, it's beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Super clean. And the sideboard, I mean, cherry on top. 4, 4, 4, 1, 1, 1, just the singletons to just push the dial in a certain direction for matchups you want, like 2 Sulfuric Vortex, perfectly fine main deck card, a little slow, but definitely does what you want to do, gives you a little bit more late game reach, makes you a little bit more um, resilient to creature removal. And of course, the extra Vortex is just great against decks that want to go long in the sideboard and that are going to be bringing in things like Disenchants or Blue Blasts and stuff like that. So you definitely pretty cool there. Also, again, I'm a big fan of all the flaring pain. That's pretty sweet, preventing you from getting locked out by Cop Red and stuff like that. Anarchy, of course, all these guys do. And of course, just huge fan of Seal Fire, big fan of Seal Fire. It's always nice it gives you that little bit of extra consistency. As a main deck card, it's so good because you can just be like, blam, turn 1, Seal of Fire, go, is perfectly fine, depending on, like, say you're playing in a match where card quantity is more important, say like against control decks, mid-range decks, things like that. Seal of Fire is great. So you don't have to mull your hand because it's too slow or too early, or you get choked on mana later or things like that. If you want to unload all your burn spells on at one particular point. Seal of Fire lets you, again, it's just a shock, right, which is fine, but it lets you use your mana in a very efficient manner. Again, if you don't have a Jackal Pup or Mog Fanatic on turn 1, you can slay him your Seal of Fire. It's so good. It's just so good. Big fan of Seal of Fire. And of course, I like Firebolt too. But yeah, Seal of Fire, great card, great art. And yeah, typically, this is a pretty typical stock list. So yeah, I like it. Very nice. Very beautiful. All right, and now we have a more or less stock slide list. I mean, you can mess with all sorts of numbers and things in the sideboard. You can totally go pretty hard on one-ofs and stuff like that. Like the one-of Curse Totem, and of course the one-of Null Rod. Null Rod being good against things like the Devourer deck, against Mud, pretty good against Mud, things like that. Anything with nasty artifact things that you want to shut down their activated abilities, obviously, right? Where things like, obviously Seal Cleansing isn't great versus our good friend Phyrexian Devourer. But yeah, I think there's a ton of stuff you can do in the sideboard. But again, big fan of the double Exalted Angel, right? The pair of Exalted Angel in the sideboard's pretty great. Love that. Again, love the 4 red blasts, great against blue decks. And just a lot of great stuff. Astral Slide in the sideboard instead of the main deck. I think that's fine too. Yeah, a lot of really cool stuff. Again, this is the fairly stock list, or at least the versions that most people are running right now, at least in the current meta. A big fan of Dust Bowl and or Thawing Glaciers. Not sure if I want one of each or if I just want 2 Dust Bowl. Just having that ability to turn extra lands into things that can kill stuff, or into mana denial, and or be able to kill man lands is pretty nice, but hard to say. Both cards are pretty sweet though. I think I typically like 3 Enlightened Tutor rather than 4. This deck has a ton of, what's the word I'm looking for, velocity, I believe, where you're able to access a bunch of your cards because you're just cycling so much, which is pretty strange for a non-blue deck. But yeah, you can really find all your stuff pretty well, and I think the fourth Enlightened Tutor is kind of overkill. It's kind of an awkward card, but I don't think it's totally like you can't justify it. But I like three Enlightened Tutors a little bit better. Everything else looks pretty sweet. Yeah, pretty sweet deck. All right, now we have goblins, and as per usual, pretty typical list. Great stuff here. We have 24 lands. Again, you gotta run 24 lands. So good. And some of the flex slots we have naturalize. Of course, naturalize is great against a ton of different things. Great against all sorts of nasty things like Oath of Druids, as well as things like humility, which is really hard to beat, as well as E-Plague. So a lot of play there, a lot of play there. And I like that, well, okay, they do go a little too hard on the naturalizes in the sideboard, like, bruh, bruh. Like, you could definitely play another pyrokinesis or two, or a crypt or something would be better. Obviously, not a big fan of Call Over the Claw for reasons I have outlined before, basically TLDR, it's not needed. Of course, an interesting card, I'm pretty sure we've talked about Mossfire Valley before. I definitely go back and forth on it. It definitely is a pretty awkward card, like, not being able to open up on Goblin Lackey if you have like a Wasteland and a Mossfire Valley or something, and like a forest or whatever in your opening hand, or something like that, is pretty awkward. Um, Generally, like, depending on what decks you're playing against, like if that was a City of Brass, you could just be like, okay, turn one Lackey, turn two waste you, which is certainly pretty strong versus a lot of different decks. But yeah, if I was even going to play Mossfire Valley, I definitely think I'd only play one. But obviously, this person certainly understands that, A, if you want to cast Naturalize and you want to cast it early and often, you really need additional green sources. Again, generally, I think I'm okay with just taking the extra damage from City of Brass. I think that's pretty important to just be able to, either cast, your lackeys on turn one, and then also um, your naturalize on turn two and stuff like that. The damage is not great. Obviously, you really want to avoid that, but I think even more paramount than that is being able to have a solid mana base that casts all your spells. I think that's far more important. So yeah, Mossfire Valley, like I said, I'm still kind of wonky on it. But yeah, anyways, it's a nice card to think about. I would typically just go with City Brass, take the hits to some of the more, aggressive decks in the format, but I'll just play more Pyrokinesis in the board. I think that's perfectly fine. Yeah, but other than that, a fairly typical list. Not much to see here. Also, a bunch of these decks only have 14 cards in the sideboard. Not a big deal, just kind of wonky. So there's that. Okay, and now we have not mostly a stock main deck of elves. The only thing I don't like is the 3 Tangle Wire. Like, Tangle Wire is so sweet and so strong, especially when like you can completely negate it by, oh, you're tapping your lands down, then it's like, oh, I play my Cradle and I can still produce a million things and put out a ton of stuff. And so yeah, I think it's wrong to only play 3 Tangle Wire. I like Tangle Wire a lot. It's very sweet. It's definitely one of your only pieces of disruption. So I think that's pretty important. Pretty important. In the sideboard, of course, we got really interesting stuff. For example, the Wall of Roots and Ravenous Baloth. These are against red decks. Wall of Roots just being able to block stuff, and like if they want to kill it, they'll probably have to bolt it too. So it's a 2-for-1, saves your life. That's pretty great. It also is a mana source too, which is kind of neat. As well as Ravenous Baloth. Obviously, this is very good against red decks for very obvious reasons. And then it makes them have to think about keeping in awkward cards like Sulfuric Vortex, which aren't the best against a deck like Elves, where you'd rather have things like, Lava Darts and stuff, and obviously having too many slow, dirtly cards is pretty awkward. So that's pretty interesting. So I think this is a pretty interesting way to address the red matchups. I know the Wall of Roots has been a little bit more common for a while in the sideboard, but Ravenous Baloth I'm not sure if I've seen before. But it's fairly obvious what deck's there for. So yeah, good stuff here. All right, and now we have goblins again. More or less same main deck as the last guy or girl. I can't remember who it was. Whatever. Uh, so yeah, again, all the stuff about Moss Fire Valley, blah blah blah. We already talked about that. More or less, the sideboard's not too different. Well, there are some differences. Flash of Defiance being a hoser against green and white decks, which is pretty interesting. As well as, I mean, Flash of Defiance is really interesting. I typically haven't really played with it in the sideboard. It's a pretty sweet card. It's definitely one of the good anti-white and or green cards that you want to play with. Being able to use it twice is pretty strong. There's just so many good options for anti-white cards in the sideboard that it's hard to choose, but that's okay, that's okay. Anyways, it's a cool card. It's definitely something to note going forward. It's a sweet card. So Simoon is definitely one that's not seen particularly often. Obviously, I'm a huge fan of it in Fires. It's so sweet. You know, tech from back in 2000 where you kill your opponent's birds and elves. And in this format, there's also just tons of other 1 toughness creatures, and it is asymmetrical and instant speed. Very, very sweet. I just love Simoon. It's such a cool card. Is that like a real weather phenomenon? Simoon? Is it like a typhoon? Is that like an Asian word? Pretty sure it is. Um, Anyways, a lot of cool stuff here. A lot of cool stuff. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Cool stuff. Okay, and now we have Dreadnought. This is the typical deck du jour of the. Am I even using that idiom right? That whatever. It doesn't even matter. We got mono blue Dreadnought, and this is fairly standard, you know, kind of Dreadnoughty stuff. Always like to see the one of Disrupt. You can always get people with that. And obviously when you do, it's great. Always feels good getting people with force spike effects, and of course this one even cantrips, which is even better. Yeah, you can't go wrong with this guy. I'm a huge fan of Disrupt. It's very disruptive. It can change the way you play, especially the way your opponents play if they know you're playing it, even though you only have one of. Also, the main deck only has 57 cards. All these missing cards always throw me off. I wonder what's supposed to be in here. Maybe is it like foil? No, there's the foil. Gosh, it's a vision charm. I don't know. Not sure. Maybe winter orbs? Huh. Well, at least the sideboard has 15 cards. Anyways, nothing too wonky here. All right, now we got the Tide Still deck. Yeah, this deck is sweet because you get to play Navinral's Disc and the Chroma's Vengeance. I think those are pretty sweet cards. I just like playing them a lot. Obviously, you can play them in a bunch of other decks too, but yeah, a Chroma's Vengeance is super cool. Just deals with all sorts of random junk, as well as Disc doing the same thing, but also at instant speed. And of course, the nice thing about Vengeance is you can cycle it if it's garbage. We also have a main deck Replenish, which I typically think the Tide Still decks play. Pretty sure. Yeah, which is pretty good with, well, literally all the enchantments for obvious reasons. You know, like getting back additional standstills or seals can be pretty nuts versus a lot of decks. Or like if they destroy your Humility, you can replenish it back in play. And of course, there's the Parallax Tides too for obvious reasons. Yeah, you can do the combo again to get rid of the rest of their lands. Yeah, nothing too wonky here. Typical sideboard stuff. Pretty sweet deck. And of course, at number 1, we have everyone's favorite. Look at this, Enchantress. Oh, we love it. Big fan of the City of Brass. You know, people that really take their mana bases seriously and just be like, you know what, I gotta do this. If I want to cast these spells, this is what I gotta do. Especially with this deck having things like Engineer Plague in the sideboard, or especially the main deck Words of War. Words of War, very sweet card. If you don't have like a Fertile Ground or something, you know, to cast it, you'll need lands and things like that. So yeah, definitely Words of War, pretty sweet way to kill people. I'm not sure. I like Words of War sometimes. Like when I've played Enchantress, like I've been somewhat happy with it, sometimes not. It can be kind of awkward, especially like with the the whole needing red mana thing. But it is a nice card to play, and it certainly ends the game very quickly. And of course, this one has 3 replenish. Now, typically, I only like too many, unless you're playing against a ton of decks, like say the last deck, which had Vengeance and Disc and stuff like that, and all sorts of sweepers and seals. I only like 2 replenish. But if you were playing in a meta where there's just like Pernicious Deeds and all sorts of crazy stuff like that all over the place, I could see playing 3 replenish. It is just really awkward to draw when, because a lot of times it doesn't do anything. It's just a 4 mana blank when you're just going through your deck and doing your thing. It's just like, oh, I have this replenish and it's not doing anything. So that's awkward. But other than that, yeah, I like it. It looks pretty good. Got the cops and hate cards in the sideboard and curse totems for creature decks and combo decks and all sorts of good stuff. Nothing too weird here. But yeah, good job to all these people who did the thing and played in the pre-modern German championship. Oh my gosh, great work. I knew you guys could do it. But yeah, that's basically it. Now we just we're all done. That was it. There's only top 8, not a top 16. That's okay. I think the next thing we'll be doing is covering the was it the December monthly, online monthly? That has a top 16. So that'll be a little bit longer. But yeah. So yeah, nothing too wonky here. These are decks we've grown to see a lot of. Typically, pretty sweet. Definitely see a little bit of evolution of technology, right? With the the L's decks, especially with the Wall of Roots and Ravenous Baloth against red decks and things like that, and all sorts of cool things like that. Different pieces of tech in the sideboard, which is great. There's so many really powerful hosers in this format. Like you can really tailor your sideboard to beating certain decks. So yeah, pretty cool stuff. Pretty cool stuff. So that's about it for today, guys. So thanks for stopping by, and have a great day.